Hi everybody, my name is Kacper and I am Ruby on Rails developer. It started 7 years ago. I was talking with my friend who was a developer and I told him that I have a lot of free time. I had because I was studying and that I want to try coding, try programming. It sounds like fun. So, do you have any programming language you could recommend? And he answered, try Ruby. Ruby is cool. And that's how I became Ruby on Rails developer. Ruby, after 7 years, is still my primary programming language. And right now I'm working for the company which is called Oxford Valuation Partners. This company calculates value of other companies based on files they are sending to the Oxford. So basically what we do there is financial calculations. But today I want to talk to you about consumer-driven contracts, aka Cdc Pattern. This pattern comes from Martin Fowler and from this very paper. It's a bit long, sciencey, complicated. It's hard to get the idea from it. So what I'm gonna do is to show you an implementation of Cdc pattern, and I hope that it will be enough to get this whole idea and how useful and powerful this pattern can be in service-oriented architecture systems, because that's what we will be talking about. All right, so let's say we are building a system with service-oriented architecture, and we have two simple services, API and web client. Web client relies on the API completely. It doesn't even have its own database. So I'm going to call them provider and consumer, simply because API provides data and the consumer uses them in some, web client uses them in some way, consumes them in some way. In this example, my consumer uses data retrieved from the provider in JSON format to display some information about users in the browser. Both services have tests. Let's start with the API test. It's a very simple one. It's a test for user's call. So what we usually do, we expect that the response is some type of data. So I expect that response for this call is an array of objects, and then I expect that these objects have some specific keys and values. It's very simple. This test may be not perfect, but we all know this. You get the idea. Let's talk about web client tests, consumer tests. So our web client is a consumer, which means that it cannot live without its provider. It has to have its API. So if you want to test the consumer, any consumer really, if you want to test it properly, it's obvious that we need some kind of API in the testing process, right? Otherwise, it wouldn't make any sense. However, we don't want to, and we shouldn't use an actual provider for that, an actual API, for obvious reasons. So we need some kind of imitation, simulation of the API when we test our consumer. Of course, the most popular way to do it is to stub HTTP responses. We know that our application needs to send requests when it's being tested, so we prepare all required responses in advance, so we can serve them whenever they are needed. Like in this example, I'm testing this table with users. So I need to stop this user's call. I need to hard code the response, and then I can test my application. Right here, I'm verifying that HTML rendered based on this hard-coded response is correct. Quick note: writing these stubs, if you think about it, is kind of like writing an API, because if you take all stubs together, they will create an API, very strange one, where all responses are hard-coded, but still it would be an API, in the sense that it would be a web service which can respond to HTTP requests. Okay, so this is our system, and it's doing great. Consumer tests passed, provider tests passed, and the whole system is working very nicely. So we are gonna mess it up. Let's imagine that API team just released the newest version of their software. And this new version returns users' data not as an array, but as an object. But unfortunately, they forgot to tell the other team, the web client team, about this small change. It would never happen in real life because nobody is that irresponsible, but they did. So, of course, as a result of this honest mistake, production crashed. Now, it's not a problem that production crashed, because it can be fixed like in 2 minutes, right? The problem is that it will happen again and again and again, because there is nothing which would prevent this. So another reason why this is kind of terrifying is because our tests are still green, right? Production crashed, but if I look on the tests, everything is fine. And it is frightening because we wrote good tests, we have a good coverage, and it turns out that that's all for nothing, because our services tests says nothing about the system as a whole. Once again, system parts are properly tested and they work as expected from the developer's point of view. The thing that doesn't work is the system they create together. One could say that it's a simple compatibility problem. Just update the web client and everything will be fine. It's not that simple, and I think I can prove it by asking a simple question, this one. Why is the web application which should be updated? Okay, we can assume that API guys did the release for a reason. Somebody told them to, or something. So probably the web app guys are the ones who didn't follow. But in the real world, it could easily be not true. Maybe this change wasn't supposed to be in this release, or it's an old requirement which is no longer valid. The point is that we don't know that. We cannot decide. Maybe consumer should be updated, but maybe provider changes should be reverted. As far as we know, we cannot tell this. We can't tell that. Sometimes we have a documentation, and if we do, we can use it to answer this question. We can point at it and say, Right here, see, it clearly states that it has to be an array, not an object. So let's get it fixed. Let's get it fixed. And in theory, it's a very good approach to have a set of expectations about the system which all players should follow. As a matter of fact, this is the foundation of Cdc Pattern, having these expectations, because they can be seen as a contract between a provider and its consumers. The pattern itself doesn't specify implementation of contracts. And writing contracts down on a paper is just one of possible implementation. The problem is the problem with the documentation is, of course, that it doesn't yell or lights up or put everything on fire when it is not being followed. Rules are easy to ignore if they exist only as a form of a document, as a document. So we will be looking for some better implementation, kind of super documentation which cannot be so simply ignored, a contract we have to pay attention to. Okay, so we introduced the problem, how to keep system parts compatible with each other. And now we will try to figure out some solution. And my proposition is to immediately notify all system parts about any compatibility breaking update. If we not notify system parts, then developers will probably know what to do with this update. So that's the general idea. Let's go back to consumer tests for a moment. We use stubs to trick our application. And it's okay, it's fine, it's working, because as long as there is something which responds to the application requests, it doesn't care. Everything can work as usual. But it means that if I, for example, replace stubs with an actual HTTP server, the application, of course, won't even notice. And that's what I'm going to do right now. I'm going to remove all stubs from my test suite and build another brand new API on the top of them. And whenever I will start testing, I will start a real HTTP server with this API, and this server will respond to all requests sent by the application during the tests. Here is how it can be done. It's an API which handles one request written with Sinatra. And yeah, it responds to user's call and returns JSON we've seen before. Nothing magical about that. It's very simple. It's done. I have my API. The only thing left to do is to set up my tests environment to use this API, just like the real one. Thanks to the webmock gem, it can be simply done with one line, this stub request line. This line means that all requests will be intercepted and then redirected to the specified rack application, which in my case is, of course, my new API. Okay, so now we are testing the consumer against this new external service. Whenever this service changes, my application has to change too. For example, if I will start serving, if server starts serving objects rather than arrays, my tests will fail, right? So they are bound together. They have to change at the same time. They have to be compatible with each other all the time. Otherwise, there will be a red light. Of course, our new API is supposed to be the real API reflection, right? It's imitating the real API. Otherwise, none of this would make any sense. But if that's the case, it means that we have just coded our expectations about the provider in our contract API codebase. We expect arrays, not objects, and this expectation is now written in my new API. In other words, we have just wrote a consumer-driven contract in a form of API. So I'm going to call it right from now contract API. Okay, but maintaining another service, of course, doesn't make our life easier, right? It makes our life harder. So why would we do that? What is it for? And the answer is because if you have it, we can also test the provider against this contract API. Think about it. Contract API is designed to be very similar to the real API, right? So now I can test my API, my real API, like that. I will send a request to the contract API. Then I can send the same request to the real one, and I can compare their responses. If they don't match, it means that something is wrong. Maybe provider doesn't fit contracts anymore, or maybe there are some new rules, some new expectations, and the contract itself is now outdated and has to be updated. Okay, so this is our API test from before. And this test contains information about all data about expected JSON, right? That it has to be an array, that it has to have objects in it, objects have to have these values, and so on and so on. But now I have the same information coded in my API, in my contract API, right? So there is a duplication. We don't like them. So we have to remove this duplication. And of course, the perfect place. Maybe in other words, we want to keep all expectations about our system in one place. And of course, the contract is the perfect place for that, right? It's the perfect candidate. So that's what I'm going to do right now. I'm gonna remove this whole stuff from API test because all required information are now in my contract API. Yes, that's right. That's how my test can look like. Looks now. I have to do only one thing. I have to, okay, two things. I have to send request to the real API, send request to the contract API, and compare responses. As I said before, if they don't match, the test should fail because something is wrong. Okay, so the problem was to keep this compatibility, right? To keep system parts compatible with each other. And the solution would be to notify all parts of the system about these breaking changes. And let's think if we accomplished that, if we succeeded. So this is the scenario. API team introduces compatibility breaking change, right? So automatically their test suite fails because it doesn't fit contract anymore. But this change is very important. It's required. We have to do it. So the people in charge decide that contract can be updated. From now on, our provider is fine. But this contract update automatically makes all other services outdated. Their tests are now failing. So the web client team now has to update their application code base. So they do, and now everything is fine, right? Everybody is happy. The key point here is that nobody could deploy before it was fixed, because everybody knew immediately that something wrong is happening. And if there are more services, it applies to all of them. All of them will fail, their tests will fail, and all of them have to be updated. Okay, so looks like we really are notifying all developers by failing their tests. But of course, it's not very. I don't want to write a server every time I want to write a contract. It's not very convincing. I want to write a specification, basically list of calls and responses, and then some external tool should be responsible for turning my documentation into a living service. You know, like API or Swagger or something like that. So I'm gonna use external tool for that. It's called it's a toolkit. It's called Contracto, and yeah. So let's try this. Let's see how Cdc Pattern can be used in real life. So I will demo how it works. Okay, so this is this Contracto organization. There are many repositories, but we are interested in Contracto server and Contracto format. And Contracto server is a gem who can turn documentation written in this Contracto format to a server. So let's say I have my system, right? On the left side, I have my consumer. It responds with JSON, right? I can ask for a single user, and this is my web client. So I want to test this page with a single user. We are now concentrating on the consumer tests. So I need a contract which describes call for a single user. This view requires call for a single user. At least that's how I designed it. So I need to have this call documented. Okay, so this is my contract. First of all, it's just a simple repository. I mean, it's a usual repository. And this repository, my mouse pointer have disappeared, which makes it a bit difficult. Okay, so never mind. I am prepared for that. No, it's not. But I have to use. I couldn't use my MacBook because I spilled a tea on it 3 days ago. So I have to work on this. What I do is fine. Alright. So okay. Oh, okay. I did. Wait, sorry. So we will have to watch a movie. Is it visible? I think maybe. Okay. So this is the point I wanted to start, right? This is this repository, and it has these files with .contract.json extension. Judging by name, I can tell that each file describes a separate call. I'm interested in this call, in this single user call. So yeah, let's see it. All right. This is a JSON, of course, and what we can tell at the first moment is that I already know where and how to send this request. I know that it has to be GET request, and it has to be sent to this /user/SomeID path. But I want a response too, right? So in this examples key, it's an array of possible responses. Now, what does it mean, possible response? It means that it depends on some conditions. In this example, I want to get another response for a user with ID 1 and another response for a user with ID 2. And that the first example, is exactly about that. You can see this params ID equal to 1, and then there is this response key which has body path, right? And this body path is a path to a file which contains the response body, this one. So in a second, I'm gonna to find this file and check what the response is. It's named properly. Okay, so I'm going to this user directory where this file is supposed to be, and there it is. We can see that I already described like 3 calls. This is the response. So I expect this response if I send the call /user/1. Okay. So of course I have Contractor already installed. So what I need to do right now is to type contractor start. It means that I want to start a server, and then I need oh, maybe that way. And then I need I need URL. I need to pass an URL with my contract. In my case, this is this URL. So I'm gonna copy it. I'm gonna paste it and press enter. And we can see that it's downloading contract from GitHub. And now it tells me that server is working. So I should be able to do something like this. Of course, it's running on localhost, and this is the default port for the contractor. And I will ask for this user with ID 1, right? And I have my response. There are defined other responses as well. There were 3 files, and 3 responses are available. Okay, so that's what contractor server gem does. it can turn a JSON into a server, right? That's it. So how we can use it to test our consumer? All right, I set it like here. All right. This is my test for single user page and users page as well. We've seen it before on the slide, but I have this contractor rspec gem installed, which is a simple helper to use contractor in rspec. And if I have it, I can do this. This line tells rspec tells contractor actually to start a server before a test, right? Of course, I have to specify from where my contract has to be downloaded, or it can be on the local machine. It's also possible. Then I have to set up the endpoint, the host of my API on the test, right? For the test. So application will be working as usual. I'm just changing the port. It usually uses 3000, but now it will use this 54321. Okay, so let's check if it works. I'm gonna start my spec. Yes, contract was downloaded, right? Server started, and then my test passed. But it's not a proof that it's working, so I'm gonna change something in my contract, and then I expect my consumer tests to fail, obviously. So let's try to modify. Maybe here. No, it's not. It's not that easy. Anybody knows GitHub shortcuts? Okay. I am prepared for that too. So where are my files? Okay. Oh. Okay. Yeah, I was able to show this just right before this line, which starts contract. This is it. Okay, I can. Okay, now I'm editing. Oh, right, I'm editing. No. It's okay. It's because I was pressing arrows. That's why. No. Okay, this is the point. Yeah, test passed, right? And now I'm changing the contract. I will change this response. It will be simple change. I will change Einstein for my surname. Okay, quick update. And then let's go back to my tests. Run it again. Okay, and of course it fails because it expects Einstein, not my surname, right? So now we can believe that it actually uses this repository. Okay. Now, yeah, this is I'm blah 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 blah. In a second, it will change to the provider tests. Right, so remember that I have right now, my contract is kind of broken, right? I have changed it. So provider tests should fail, and they do. The response should contain my surname, but it's still, in the real API, with my test data, it still uses Einstein, right? So I'm fixing it. I'm fixing this, and after this update, both services tests should pass. Here I'm testing provider again. Yes, it works, and that's it. No, that's it. Okay. Okay, so I think you can see that it can be useful, but I want to demonstrate even more cool stuff. So with if I set up my continuous integration system, which happens to be Circle CI, I can do a really cool thing. At least I like it very much. This again, I'm updating specification for this time users call, all users, not single user, but all users call. It doesn't matter, but yeah. So I'm updating it, and as in slides, I'm turning this array into an object. Okay, it's done. And because I have my webhooks configured properly, immediately my test for each service runs, right? So whenever contract is being updated, build on the Circle CI automatically starts for both for both services, or in other cases for all services. It's just a configuration, but it's very useful because I can, when I decide to update the contract, which is an important event in our system evolution, everybody should know about that, and this is a way to notify everybody about this event. So yeah, right now I'm fixing my tests. So no, it's just okay. Let's see. I'm looking at tests, and they should fail because I broke, not broke, but I have updated the contract. We can see that it's the contractor server is working just as on localhost. And of course, yeah, my provider tests failed because they expect array, not user. And obviously my consumer tests will fail too because they expect the same thing. Okay. I think it's enough. I hope that you get the idea. So a few final thoughts. This is Contractor is based on ThoughtWorks Pacto-gem. It works slightly differently than Pacto because Pacto updates contracts. You have to tell Pacto to update contracts every time, and it calls the actual endpoint for all responses. So it's a bit different, but Contractor format is like simplified version of Pacto of Pacto's one. Okay, so that's it's not like me and my colleagues invented something. We just used something which already was there. Another thing is that, of course, in my example, I was testing against data, right? But you can easily define a schema, a response schema in Contracto or Pacto, and it will. You can test your systems against just response structure, not necessarily against the data. And last of all, consumer-driven contract is a very high-level concept. It says nothing about implementations, how it should be done. For example, it can be Excel spreadsheet with the expectations. It can be, as I said before, documentation on paper. Implementation is up to you. And I wanted to present you one in a hope that it will be enough to get the idea. Of course, I'm not saying it's the best one. I'm not saying that use Contracto. I'm not saying use Pacto. Use whatever you want, or implement your own or implement contracts in your own way. The important thing is that this concept allows you to manage this chaos created by which can be easily created by when you have many microservices, right? Yes, so I think that's it. Thank you very much. And
Great, thank you. Are there questions? A lot of questions, good.
So in real life, you can't update the consumer and provider at the same time. So I imagine that first you need to update your consumer so it supports old and new version of the API. Then you can update the provider to actually provide the new version. And then you can remove the support for old version of the API from consumer. So that way you can deploy, you have like micro deploys and you don't break anything. Because updating Android and iOS clients can take hours or days. So how do you handle that transition period when consumers need to, for a moment, handle two versions of the API to get ready to the new release of the provider?
It doesn't solve this problem, obviously, but it minimizes it, because this time lapse is as small as possible, right? If you inform everybody that you are planning important change, important update, there is a chance that it will be handled in a better way than just putting this on production and just wait for a crash, right? So you are right that it doesn't prevent it in 100%. However, it minimizes the risk of the actual crash, and that's all.
Thank you for a nice presentation. I wanted to ask you if there is maybe a tool which you could use to generate some more popular formats of API documentation, like Swagger, for example.
It's an open source, so yeah, I know it should. Contracto and, in fact, Pacto 2 are rather simple projects. They do stuff they are supposed to do, but it would have to be written to handle these formats. Of course, it's a good. It would be a very good thing, and I'm thinking about it. However, I have other things to do. So, but it would be very nice to just change adapters and use API Markdown or Swagger or RAM or whatever. I think that at the time I was developing it with my colleagues, I wasn't that aware that there already are so mature formats to describe it. But I forgot something. The problem with the usual formats is that they do not provide you optional responses. You've seen that I can pass different IDs and I can get different responses, and you cannot do it with Swagger or API. Then you define call and you always get the same response, and it's very important. This possibility is very important because it makes testing much more easier. I don't even don't know how you would have to hack this to get different responses. But if I want to test user, it's probably not one user, right? I have different data sets for users, so I want to test at least few of them, and it cannot be done with this huge big formats. And both Pacto and Contracto can do this in a very easy way, as you have seen.
I have two questions, if I may. First question, who is allowed to change the contract?
That's a very good question, and it's called consumer-driven contract, right? And it wasn't so obvious from this presentation, but the idea is that in older times there was a provider. He has a documentation, and you have to stick to this documentation. You could do nothing about that. So it was like provider-oriented thinking. Here we are thinking from consumer point of view. So the idea is that if you have few consumers, for example, first of all they can create their own contracts. You can easily imagine that iOS have different contract because it's interested in some calls, and the web client has totally different contract because it uses API, some different calls from API. And I can write contract for my application, and iOS guys can write contract for their application, because they are only interested in this part of the API which they are using. The rest can fail and they don't care. Okay, so this is this. So consumer should be somehow. The idea is that consumer is somehow allowed to interact with this contract. And how much? It depends, of course, on many things. It may be that only consumer can, that you are developing a system where consumers have they decide everything. Then guys from the provider team don't even write these contracts, right? So it's up to you. But the whole idea of CDC is to give consumers more power.
Okay, thank you for your answer. And then now on to the second question. And how would you express the following constraint on an API? The API is offline between 6 p.m. and 8 a.m.
Good one. No idea right now, but it has its limitation. It's more dynamic than API blueprint or something. This format it's more dynamic. I can handle some conditions, as you've seen, like parameters, headers, and so on. But I cannot answer this.
You've seen examples of tests for web frontend. I wonder if you know about any solutions that would help to enforce or to notify mobile developers about the contract change.
Actually, this contractor retrofit, right? And it is used by Android developers, and I mean my colleagues, Android developers. And this is the library which also parses contractor format, and it allows them to verify. I believe they are called models or something to verify if everything is okay. So the answer is it is used mobile developers do use it, and it can be used. They use response schema to validate, but I don't want to. I'm not an expert in that, so that's all I know.
Okay, any other questions? And that's it.